All right, this is Grassy Bar Oyster Company coming in to all some product. Good morning, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing great. I'm Steve, I think I've met you a couple times before.
Yeah, I'm Charles.
Good to see you again.
Oysters are varying. We're going to mail by GSO, GLS tonight to San Francisco, and then these ones in the foreground are going to the Broad Street Oyster down in Malibu. They came up to pick them up.
Oh wow!
They're picking them up today.
Let's put Diaz in here too.
Cool. So they've got an online order. They're gonna ship up to San Francisco. They got a pickup order from Malibu, California. Somebody's gonna drive up here and pick them up. And then Taganzini's and Giovanni's has some orders for them too here. How many per bag there, Charles?
10 dozen.
10 dozen per bag?
Yeah, 100. Yes, this one oyster bar is getting 150 dozen.
Wow. Yeah, the oyster bar in Malibu, he says, getting 150 dozen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
We're really happy about that order. Well, oysters have a long history here in Morro Bay, starting with the native oyster and the Native Americans that fished them, and you can still find Indian shell middens for native oysters around Los Osos, and so this estuary must have had huge numbers of native oysters at one time. But
what were the native oysters here, George?
Well, you know, I don't. They're called Australurida now. I don't know if they were very different then or what they were, but the shells seem different to me. They seem kind of bigger and like it was a little different variety. But you can still find native oysters in our bay. I didn't think there were any until about 2 years ago. A biologist showed some to me down by Great American Fish Company underneath there.
Okay. You know, we were on a field trip with our marine ecology class, and we saw some attached to the rocks off of point over there.
Oh, really? So they're they're Pacific oysters too.
Oh, okay. So they could have been those.
So it could be. So you got, but they're different. So. If they get really big and they have a lot of purple on the shell, it's probably Pacific.
Okay.
And then, you know, with the California gold rush and all the Easterners flooding into California, it brought this huge hunger for oysters. Oysters were a big part of people's diet on the East Coast, and oysters were really, really popular. And so they quickly ate up the native oysters. I don't know if there were many here in Morro Bay, but in places like San Francisco Bay and the native oysters quickly were wiped out, and the 49ers wanted other sources of oysters. And so as soon as the Transcontinental Railroad opened up, the very first summer that train came from the East Coast, they had oysters on board. and they planted them in San Francisco Bay.
No
It was
kidding.
really important to people. There was a whole carloads, of oysters, and the success of that's the American oyster, the Crassybaroroystercompany virginica, and they didn't do that well in San Francisco Bay. They did not reproduce, but but it was an important fishery for a long time. Every year they would get young oysters from the East Coast and plant them in the beds around the South Bay and San Francisco. But San Francisco was the center of oystering on the west coast of North America until pollution just completely killed off the whole industry.
Wow, that's crazy to think about pollution that long ago
Yeah.
being that bad.
Yeah, right. And so our Fish and Game, California Fish and Game, now Fish and Wildlife, they were really interested in promoting oyster farming, oyster culture here in California bays, starting in like the 1950s or even earlier, 1930s, I think. And some biologists from Fish and Game went over to Japan and studied the baby. They had a thriving oyster industry in Japan, and somebody tried bringing baby Pacific Japanese oysters to California, and they were able to do it using the young oysters, the seed oysters. And that's what got Morro Bay going, was the Pacific oyster using seed from Japan. And so starting in the 1930s, the Fish and Game leased out a lot of acreage, practically all of this back bay of Morro Bay, something like 1,600 acres were devoted to oyster culture. And by World War II, Morro Bay was a major oyster producer of Pacific or Japanese oysters. And so Morro Bay's had a spotty history though, probably because of water pollution. The industry kind of died out in the 70s and went through some tough times. And the acreage was reduced to about 350 acres. And there was when I came here in 1991, there was one oysterman named Bill Williams. He had all 300 and something acres, and he lived in a houseboat out here. And it was just a funky kind of way to get beer money, and he lived out there, but he knew a lot about oysters too. But he drowned out here in 2003 or something around there, and he fell off his houseboat, I think. And
I want to move a little bit. I think the wind might be obstructing us a little bit.
Yeah, it's getting windy, I know. Should have gone a little earlier.
Yeah.
And so Bill Williams' daughters ran the oyster farm for a few years, but decided to get out of the business. And so they sold half of their leases to Morro Bay Oyster Company and the other half to me, and I got mine in 2009. So,
Okay.
Yeah. And so the oyster aquaculture is, it's controlled and it's mainly managed by the Fish and Wildlife Department and the Fish and Game Commission, and they have these what are called state water bottom leases, and they're parcels of mud flats mostly, and they have some in Tamales Bay, and they used to have some in Drake's Estero, and they rent them out in these long-term leases to people that are interested in growing shellfish on them. And so I took over the old lease from the Williams family in 2009 by signing. I had to pay them a bunch of money so that they would sign it over to me. And
You paid the Williams?
Yeah.
Okay, so they owned it.
Because they had the lease in their name, and so I wanted the lease, so I had to pay them money for them to transfer it to me. And then there's a hearing where the Fish and Game checks out the person to see the new prospective oyster fishermen, to see if they think they'll be able to grow oysters and they have the know-how and the wherewithal to do it. And then if they say yes, then you can transfer the lease into your name. So that's what happened to me. So a lot of the success of oyster do with water quality wherever you are, and most oyster farms are located in protected waters near the ocean, and so they're in estuaries, and estuaries are really popular places with all kinds of animals and humans and all kinds of human activities like towns and cities and marinas and factories and wastewater treatment plants and all kinds of potential impacts. And then there are creeks and rivers that feed into the estuary that are potential sources of pollution. And so for us to be successful, we have to have clean water, and that's probably the biggest and difficult thing to control. We really can't control it, but it's the most important thing to having a successful oyster farm. You have to have clean water. That's a prerequisite. And Morro Bay's had some problems with that, with water quality not meeting the standards. And there have been some studies, and a lot of it has been due to just wild populations of seabirds. We have huge populations of wildlife, seabirds that come out here and over winter and that kind of thing. And huge populations of pelicans. But and so of the 300 acres that the Fish and Game leased to our two oyster farms, only something like 50 of them have been approved for oyster culture. And the rest of it, the water quality might be fine now, but in the past at some time it lost its certification because it got some bad water samples taken and put it out of compliance.
What's the tide doing right now?
So we have a high tide right now. It's
high tide.
Traveling over the mud flats here heading towards our oyster farm. It's only a couple feet deep where we are, and we're hoping we don't get stuck down here. It's still high tide, but it's not a very high tide. You can see it's only about 3 high tides. So we're just sort of skimming over the shallows. This boat is pretty good in that way. Pretty small draft.
So how often do you have to check water quality, George?
So we required to do monthly compliance sampling, it's called. So the first month of every month we have to take samples from all around the bay, send them in, and they all have to meet the criteria. And it's been good. We've had good water quality here for some time. There's two kind of aspects to water quality. One is during heavy rainfall events, it's known that you're going to get a spike of dirty water that's short-lived, 72 hours about. And that's a predictable thing that's expected. But if you get dirty water during dry weather and the peak of full count is up when it shouldn't be, then you're going to have problems. So stretched along the bottom, and that's for lighter weight bags of oysters that are kind of lightweight, and they could get knocked around and moved by the wind waves and tides.
But that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, it's good for them to get jostled. That's right. And then up ahead, so that's the bottom culture. That's the old way that we have been growing our oysters. Our health department advised us to grow oysters on the bottom so there wouldn't be any place for birds to roost. The main concern being lots of big bird population moving on the oysters in the water. But we found that the bottom culture is so glorious because it produces sort of in order to get a really high quality oyster off the bottom, you have to work the oyster really, really hard. And you have to pull the bags out, you have to sort them, grade them, and then at low tides you have to flip the bags back and forth over on each low tide.
Each low tide?
Well, every 2 weeks. Each big low tide.
Big low tide, okay.
Yeah, every 2 weeks. And even then you end up with a population of oysters, some of which are never going to be a really good cocktail, a really good half-shell, high-end oyster bar oyster. And you end up having to grow them for another year or two to create a big barbecue oyster. So you end up spending a lot more time and work and getting, and you end up with a large, heavy product that's difficult to ship. And you get the same amount of money for that one oyster as you would if it was only this big and a really high-end oyster bar, cocktail oyster.
So what's the time frame difference between a barbecue and a cocktail
well,
oyster?
It's at least a year.
A year?
Yeah,
wow.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's more labor involved, it sounds like, with the barbecue oyster.
And so the bottom culture is economically marginal, and it's really hard to make it. And I really don't think it's viable anymore. I mean, we're always going to do some of that, but we realized that we needed to get up to date, and we're going to have to get off the bottom and grow oysters in a more modern way, such as this field here. This is our tumble culture field, and we think that we have solved the bird problem by orienting all the blue buoys in an upright fashion instead of sideways, where we used to have them attached at 2 points at either end, so they were kind of fixed to the bag. And now we have them so they bobble and dangle and bob back and forth, and they have a sort of a pointy knot on the end. And they're just not a very nice place for a bird to sit. And so we really don't have much problem with birds. And that was kind of one of the big innovations that Nate, our DC, came up with that. He sort of thought.
So how many iterations of this tumble buoy system have you gone through?
We've changed 2 or 3, you know.
Okay.
We're using the same basic trellis system. It's a stainless steel cable stretched 2.5 feet above the mud, being suspended off the bottom by PVC posts. And then at either end there are anchors that are screwed into the mud. They're kind of a screw anchor that you screw into the mud. And then there's a turnbuckle on the stainless steel cable so you can tighten it. And each bag has 2 of those buoys, most cases.
Is that just to float it?
And it holds one edge of the bag up when the tide's in, like it is now. And the other edge of the bag is attached to the cable. So at low tide, the bags hang down, and the oysters roll down to the edge of the bag where the buoys are. And then at high tide, the bag rotates upward, and the oysters roll down to the edge of the bag that's next to the cable. And so on each tide and during the wind, when there's wind, the oysters are always bouncing around, and it completely changes the product you get. You end up with this super world-class, high-end, just choice oyster, extra small oyster. The shell is small and round, but inside is just packed with oyster meat, and so it's a little package just packed with plump oyster. It's just fantastic.
And so the jostling around really helps break the edges off and makes that deeper body oyster.
Yeah, it changes the way the oyster grow and the way they invest in shell. And when they're on the bottom, they're kind of reaching up and they're creating all this thin, flaky, long shell, trying to get off the bottom and get away from each other or something. And then when they're tumbling, they make a really thick, round, curly shell. They tend to just sort of get rounder and deeper rather than long and skinny.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oysters are very strange creatures, and their morphology is totally plastic. It's totally dependent on their environment, like a plant.
Okay. And how many oysters do you have set here now within this buoy system?
So this system holds 1,000 oyster bags, and each one holds 200 or 250 oysters.
So each bag has 250?
250,000 oysters we can hold in this system. Yeah.
Wow. So each line is 1,000? What'd you say? Each line?
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
The whole thing holds 1,000 bags.
Oh, 1,000 bags. Okay,
Yeah,
so
1,000
1,000 bags and 250 per bag.
Yeah.
Do the math.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot of oysters. And how much do you have in production?
And right now they're not moving because, I mean, they're moving a little bit because of the COVID thing, where our sales are way, way, way down. So they're just sitting there getting too big and too fat. So, yeah.
How many do you have still in bottom production on the bottom?
We plan about 1 million oysters a year.
Okay.
So maybe 700,000.
Okay.
Something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. And we can see the eelgrass is doing just fine out here.
Yeah, this is our eelgrass meadow that's in between our rivers. It's a little bit deeper here. It's a little subtidal, and so we stay out of, even though this is part of our oyster farm, this is permitted to grow oysters by the Fish and Game. However, we're not allowed to grow oysters in the eelgrass, so we stay out of the eelgrass. So we have this eelgrass meadow that surrounds our oyster beds and probably benefits from the oysters, and oysters benefit from the eelgrass. It's a nice symbiosis, I think.
Yeah, I've read a little bit about how the carbon sequestration of the eelgrass benefits the oysters, right? The CO2. Suck up the CO2.
Right, they're taking up CO2 and they're giving off oxygen, which the oysters need. So.
Yeah. And have you seen this bed do better in the last couple years?
This is the best. The bed is thriving now. Yeah,
Nice.
it's doing great.
Okay. Yeah, the dark area you see out there, that's all eelgrass bed. And if you learn in ecology, the eelgrass is making a good comeback in the bay. It was as low as 9 acres not too long ago.
Yeah.
And I believe the most recent estimate is 36. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, it's growing all the time, I think. It's springtime now. It seems to be really growing fast. And so the Fish and Game is the outfit or the agency that leases the state water bottoms, but we still need other permits. And so even though we rent 158 acres from Fish and Game, the health department limited our acreage to about 40 acres based on water quality. And then the Coastal Commission, when we got our coastal development permit, they limited our operation to only 6 acres. So of the 158 acres that we pay for and rent, we're using 6 acres.
And are you
And
using
that's all
that?
we can use unless we want to have to do surveys so we probably won't be expanding anytime soon.
Yeah.
But we would like to add a few acres here and there, the higher areas that don't grow eelgrass very much.
And are you using a full 6 acres right now?
Yeah.
You are?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're maxed out.
Okay.
And this is our work platform where we pack oysters and bag them and sort them and grade them. And I'm not sure what they're doing right now. We'll go and see what they're doing.
Size sorting here.
Yeah. Let's go over here to find. So Nate is putting some oysters on the rack using our paddleboard. We use the paddleboard a lot out here.
Okay.
It's really handy to get over the eelgrass and move oysters around the shallows. We take the fins off the paddleboard so that we can go in super shallow water.
Nice.
Yeah, and it looks like they're sorting some oysters. What are you guys sorting with the drill? Extra small. Okay.
So this is you actually measuring them then? Or you?
Yeah, we use scale, extra smalls, anything under that line, extra smalls.
Yeah.
And we're getting mostly extra smalls out of this.
These are our tumbled oysters too.
Okay, yeah.
This is that kind of roundy shape that they're growing
Yeah,
in.
very deep.
These were started on the bottom, and then the last 2 or 3 months they're finished on the tumble system.
Okay.
Because since we only have 1,000 bags in tumble culture, it's not enough to just start them out as babies. We have to only and give them say 6 or 8 months on the tumble line. That would be ideal. Instead, we start them on the bottom and then finish them off in the last few months of the tumble system.
Okay. Maybe we could compare those to these are the bottom ones over here then, right?
Yeah, these are bottom grown.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can they
Big
have
difference.
more of this frilly, which is really pretty too. I really like these.
Yeah.
They get more frills and more fluting and filling.
So are you checking for dead oysters, it looks like?
Yeah, deads, doubles, and these are gonna go into the tumble bags. They're gonna be extra smalls.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Oh, so you're getting ones that are
Yeah.
to stock the tumble bags.
Yeah, the stock tumble bag with, yeah.
And what kind of mortality do you see when you're sorting a whole bag?
It varies. This one right here is not too bad. Maybe 15%.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it varies depending on what time of the year it is and the circumstances where with that particular bag where it was on the mud flats or, you know.
Okay. Cool.
Did you just bring these from the tumble system?
Those ones.
Yeah. These from?
They're about to store. These are a couple leftovers from the harvest. And then this is what Raul just sorted.
Oh, great. Oh, so you're doing this, taking this back.
Yeah. Yeah, so with the north wind, it's going to be a difficult
I know.
paddle because these bags are really heavy.
It got windy early today.
Yeah, I guess they calmed down.
So what's going on here with the yellow that you got
That's
out
our
there?
clam bed,
Okay.
vanilla clams, and the Coastal Commission requires us to put a turbidity curtain around wherever we're harvesting clams and keep it there for a couple tidal cycles, a couple days. And that way the silt and sediment that you dig up when you're digging clams, it turns the surface of the mud flat kind of into a slurry, because you're just liquefying the mud practically as you dig down with your hands and pull all the clams out. And then when the tide comes in, that could create a lot of sediment plume. And so we put that turbidity curtain around where we harvested. Yeah.
So those are not grown in bags? They're just grown on the bottom?
They're in the mud.
They're in the mud?
Yeah, they're in the mud, and you stretch a net over the mud flat so that predators can't dig them up. They're very, very popular with all kinds of animals.
Yeah, I imagine the bat rays would feast on those.
Yeah, and when they're little, when we planted them, they're only a ½ inch or 3/8 of an inch long. And so there's these delectable little morsels for shorebirds like godwits and curlews and things like that. And we followed the guidelines for how to, type of netting to put over the newly planted clam beds. And it was a ½ inch mesh. And so I bought 400,000 vanilla clam seed, grew them carefully up to that size of 3/8 of an inch or ½ inch in our flupsies. And then we planted 300,000, put the ½ inch mesh out, and everyone got eaten by shorebirds. They just picked through it. And the last 100,000 I finally wised up and used a 1/4 inch mesh. And that's where we're getting our clams now.
Oh my gosh.
So we fed a lot of birds. We kind of learned the hard way.
Yeah. And how long have you been doing the clams now? That's pretty recent, correct?
We just started harvesting clams and selling. We sold our first clams we've ever sold. In fact, the first clams to be sold out of Morro Bay in an awful long time.
No way.
We sold our first clams a couple weeks ago.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
We're selling them out of our little store.
Cool. And
on Fridays.
How long do those take to get to size?
Oh, we got them in 2017, so they're kind of slow.
They are slow.
Yeah, but they're nice, big, beautiful vanilla clams now.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah, we need to go see some.
All right, what's this crazy contraption over here? You want to talk about that thing?
This is our tube sorter machine, and it has a hopper here, so we can dump bags of little oysters in this bin here, and then the conveyor belt takes them up and dumps them into this tube that turns and rolls. There's water sprayers spraying water on the oysters, and it size sorts them into different size classes, and in the process it chips the shell and breaks up the clumps and that kind of thing. And that way, that's how we do our initial size sorting and grading of the littler oysters, like what Jevin was working with. But
and the size sorting is just
hard on them.
Just the size of they just fall out if they're too small.
Yeah, they just fall through the holes. So the smaller ones fall out first. The biggest ones come out the very end. So we end up with 3 size classes.
Okay, neat.
Yeah, it's kind of hard on them, and it's not the greatest thing, but it works pretty well.
Are you not using it as much since you went to the buoy system?
Yeah, with the buoy system, we won't use it at all.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be completely obsolete.
So the bag, can you describe how this is actually hooked up to your lines?
Yeah. So this is one of our tumble bags. It has floats on one side, we had to figure out a way to not tear the bags and lose the floats, and so we it's hard to see, but these are reinforced with a little piece of mesh, and then stainless steel hog rings. Everything's been thought out so that it actually works, and the buoys are kind of loose so that so they'll wobble in the waves, and if they're really tight on there, then at low tide you want the bag to hang all the way down like this, and if the buoys are attached really tightly, they kind of get in the way. But if they're loose, it'll go like this and land on the mud. Because and so this side of the bag has these stainless steel snaps that fishermen use, long line snaps, and they get snapped onto the stainless steel cable, and at low tide the bag will look like this, and then when the tide comes in, the bag rotates up like that until at a really high tide it'll be straight up like this. Cool. And it's pretty easy to set up a tumble culture system like we went by in the subtidal, shallow subtidal, but that's where the eelgrass is. So we have to stay out of there. And so we have to set up our tumble system and all our oyster culture in the higher intertidal zone, which makes this kind of tumble system, off-bottom culture really challenging. Because if you're too high in the intertidal zone, you'll have, the tide will never get high enough for it to do this. It'll just maybe get like this at high tide. Mm-hmm. And so the oysters will always stay at this end of the bag, and they'll never get a chance to roll the other way. And so you can make the posts shorter so it's closer to the bottom, and then it will tilt up at high tides, but at low tide it will just sort of be like this, and it won't be tilted enough to make the oysters roll down. So you need that full range to get a really good tilting action, and that's best in the shallow subtidal, but we can't use that zone, so we've had to adapt tumble culture to the higher intertidal zone, and it's working. And that was our first test. We built one line in 2018 in that zone and proved that we could make it work, and then we expanded. We had to get a special permit from the Coastal Commission to do that, to expand into that area. And we had to have the area surveyed for eelgrass, and as part of that coastal development permit, we had to sign on to a long list of terms and conditions involving making sure we don't have any oil spills, making sure we don't leave a bunch of junk out here. We have to do quarterly cleanups of the beaches around here four times a year. We have to do training of our staff on marine debris reduction, and they also required us to get a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Army Corps of Engineers required us to get a permit from the Water Quality Control Board, and the Water Quality Control Board required us to have a CEQA certification. So it created this huge cascade of regulatory hurdles to get over, and really challenging. And we got through it all last year, 2019. We got all our permits, and we were able to put in that expansion.
So from when you started that till it finished, how long did the permitting process take you, George?
It was a good year at least. Wow. A couple of years, over a year
and a half. Wow.
Yeah. 2 years, yeah, around there.
Around that, wow.
so it really limits the entry of new oyster or shellfish growers, aquaculturists. It's really challenging in California. But if you can negotiate all the regulatory hurdles, it sets you apart as being a really first-rate operation that's working within all the other interests of the state of California. You know, California wants to protect the eelgrass. They want to protect the steelhead salmon runs, and you know there are other interests that we have with these estuaries. We don't own the estuary. You know, we don't own these mud flats. We just rent them, and so we have. If we want to get our leases renewed, we have to show that we care about the other interests that the people of California have for recreation and caring for the natural resources.
And how long does your lease last? Is that an annual renewal, or is that?
No, it's a 15-year lease with the Fish and Game, which will be up in 2027, so it's not that far away now. And at that time, they will look at our compliance and how our farm's being run, and whether they want to renew it or not. So, so we're trying to do everything we can so we get a favorable response at that hearing.
Will there be a new fee at that time, or is your lease fee already established? And
There's a formula, I'm not sure if they'll be able to increase it, but it increases automatically about 2 or 3% every year. It started,
oh, really?
When we first rented this place, when we first got the oyster farm from the old oyster farmers, they were paying only $3 per acre per year. And when I took it over, they rewrote the lease and they changed that to $50 an acre per year. So with 158, also they didn't know exactly where the perimeter of my oyster farm was. I said, well, where precisely is my oyster farm, and where's this lease? Where are the corners? And there's a kind of long language in the lease saying you go 5,000 feet from this brass marker in a northwest by west direction, and that's your first corner, etc. And so I had to hire a surveyor to find out where our lease was, and it wasn't quite where they thought. That the lease was 135 acres, but it turned out to be 158 acres. So I gave 23 acres, I think, when we did the surveying. It turned out to be bigger than they thought.
And that wasn't good because you had to pay more, right?
Actually, it wasn't good because now I have to pay more. I have to pay $50 an acre for that. So it came to $7,000 and something, or $8,000 a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Which it's manageable if you sell lots of oysters. And then it's been going up every year. It goes up 2 or 3%, so automatically. So it's up to $9,000 a year now, I think.
Dang it.
And so we have to make sure that we're, you know, to be sustainable, it's more than just taking, we also have to take care, we have to make sure that we're making enough money to pay all the bills and, you know, pay our workers and pay all these rents. So we have to be a productive oyster farm and have a good product. There are 2 clam beds. One of them, they're side by side, and one of them is below the yellow turbidity curtain. The other one's just to the right of it. We're going to go over, and it's really important that the propeller doesn't tear up the netting. So now we're drifting. Is where I was digging clams yesterday. I got about 40 pounds in 2 hours of digging.
Wow. And how far?
I got completely covered in mud.
How far below the surface are these?
They're shallow. They're only an inch or 2.
Okay.
Yeah. It looks like it's not turbid in there anymore, so it's pretty much done.
Can you see the netting?
Yeah, so we're The method we use for harvesting them was developed about 200 million years ago by our ancestors, just sitting in the mud, digging it up by hand or with a little claw tool. But the actual serious clam farmers have it all mechanized, and we have to compete with them because our coastal commission won't allow us to use mechanization. They're worried it will damage the mud flats and cause too much turbidity. So we have to use manual methods. But we got a nice little clam harvest, and we're selling them locally, retail, on a small scale, and it works economically, I think.
Will you try and scale up with that operation, or are you not sure you can do it?
Yeah, we want to continue. They're really, really good clams, and people are loving them.
Cool.
So I really want to keep pursuing it. Yeah.
So this whole area here is called Shell Beach. These are all oyster shells that were stacked up here. They had a cannery here for years. You know how long the cannery was in operation?
It was built in the 50s. It was in its heyday in the 50s, 60s. Yeah.
So 50s and 60s was when the oyster cannery was in operation. And all these oyster shells are from this oyster cannery. That's a lot of shells.
All Pacific oysters, not native. There's some abalone shells too. They used to do some abalone processing.
Okay.
This is our new boat, the Mud Skipper, and it's a 38-foot aluminum boat we had built because we needed a way to transport large volumes of seawater to our new depuration plant, and which we're going to go take a look at later. And the depuration process requires water that's certified of a certain quality, and they won't allow us to use water that comes from near marinas. So we had to get the water from our oyster farm, which means transporting it by boat. So we had to get a boat big enough to haul something like 10,000 gallons. Right. Anyway, about 10 of these totes worth, which is 2,000 gallons. Yeah, they hold 200 gallons each. So, that's the story of the Mud Skipper.
Cool. All right, over here we've got your Flupsis. Love that name.
Yeah, that stands for Floating Upweller System. And it's kind of a nursery intermediate phase for raising oysters and other bivalves. And it's just a floating raft, and the oysters are down in the natural water body, which reduces the cost of pumping, because the pump that moves water through this thing doesn't have to lift water very much at all.
Cool.
The way it works is there is a pump. It's kind of more of a paddle wheel, and this is just a bucket of rocks. But this thing is a pump that's blowing water. There's a propeller right in here.
Okay.
And it's blowing water out of this central trough, which is forcing water to come in through this pipe. And the pipe is attached to a bin like this. And so these two bins have small oyster seed in them, and water is upwelling through the bottom of the mesh. The bottom of these bins is made out of screen mesh material, and water upwells, and you can see the little oysters dancing around on the bottom as the water upwells.
Can I put the camera in there? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm, yeah, point it down in there.
It's waterproof, so I can actually put it in there a little bit. And so literally water is upwelling
Yeah,
in that little tank.
upwelling all around the little oysters, and so they're getting this incredible flow of seawater going past them that's rich in phytoplankton, so they grow very fast, even though they're concentrated at a really high density. So it's a way to raise a large number of baby oysters in a small area using a minimal amount of energy.
How much faster are the oysters growing in this system compared to a normal?
They'll grow. It's more about the uniformity of the growth and the quality of the growth. If you take these little oyster seed and put them in a pouch out and lay it out on the mud flat, you'll get some that shoot ahead and they grow really fast, and then a lot of them that don't grow at all. And you'll have to flip the bag and rearrange them every often as you possibly can. That's how we raised our baby oysters for years. And it was really, again, super laborious. And so this round thing is an outflow screen, and that just prevents the baby oysters from getting sucked down the drain.
How old are these seed here?
So we got these on March 31st, and so and at that time they came from a hatchery. They already had some age since the eggs were fertilized. And so we've had them since March 31st, which is 3 weeks. And when we got them, they were about 2 to 3 millimeters in length, and now they're 5-6 millimeters, so they're growing fast.
Very cool.
And it's that first couple weeks where they're extremely small. They almost go through that fine mesh when we get them.
Wow.
And we're kind of worried about them, but now they've kind of made it around the corner and they're doing pretty well. But when we get them, they're already little juvenile oysters of about 2 or 3 millimeter length, which means they're already a couple months old, or probably at least a month old, I would think. There's a whole hatchery process that we don't do here, but that's crucial to our industry. And they sell us the baby little juvenile oysters. They cost about 1.6 or 1.5 cents each. So we bought 500,000 of them. It cost us $7,000 and something dollars, which we had to fork out. So
That's crazy.
yeah, and they're all right there. So that's $7,000 worth of oysters.
That in those two bins is 500,000 oysters?
Yeah, 250,000 in each one. Hopefully they're all there. We haven't counted them recently.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
Hey, George.
Hey, Greg.
Wow. Huh.
But the hatchery technology has been crucial to the industry to allow oyster farming to thrive. And that's a whole interesting other area that we don't get involved in, but it's more technical and involves phytoplankton culture and inducing spawning and larval rearing and everything. That's pretty technical, and there's a lot of expertise, and that's an interesting part of the industry too. Yeah.
You said the closest one is in Humboldt Bay?
Yeah, I think there's one there now, and there are hatcheries in Puget Sound area of Washington, and we got these from Hawaii, from the Big Island of Hawaii.
Really?
Yeah, there are a couple hatcheries that are owned by big oyster companies, and they find, I think the climate is really ideal on the big island of Hawaii, and there are sources of super clean seawater where there are seawater wells that go down into the lava rock, and the water filters through the lava or something, and so there's some really nice hatcheries on the big island of Hawaii.
So do these Pacific oysters like that warm water? Is that what they were used to spawning in?
Yeah,
or?
they like, you know, they evolved in temperate and climate in Japan, but the water temperature over there has a really distinct seasonality to it. So in the summer it gets quite warm.
Okay.
And the larvae do well in 75-degree water. They like a nice warm 75-degree water. And that's why we don't get a lot of reproduction of Pacific oysters here on our coast. It's just too cold. And we have had a little bit, but that was when the water was abnormally warm.
Like an El Nino event, you might get some? Okay.
Yeah, you can see a few here and there. Yeah.
Cool.
All right.
Okay.
So Steve was asking me about the mortality rate on our oyster farm of our oysters, and I said they're all over the board. It should be 100% survival. There's no predators. There's nothing really to stress them. We take really good care of them. However, once they reach almost market size, they can suddenly succumb to some kind of epidemic, pandemic, some unknown origin. Just oysters starting to keel over. They start to gape, and then they kick the bucket. You can lose huge numbers of oysters that you've invested a lot in for years. And we, several years ago, 2017, I think, we lost half our crop, and the other oyster farmer said he lost 90% of his. And they just big, nice oysters ready to sell, and they just start gaping, and they just die. And we sent them to pathologists to find out what the pathogen was, and they couldn't find anything. And so it's just a mystery, you know. And we really hurt us badly. You know, it was devastating. So it's a pretty risky business in that way.
Yeah.
There's a space up ahead that's permitted for a restaurant, but it's going to need a lot of work. You know, the floors, the kitchen, there's no kitchen set up yet. So it has a lot of potential. It's a really great location. And
Yeah.
This is a coastal access landing here. Have you been up here before?
Yeah, I walked up here the other day.
Yeah.
So this is where your diners will eat their oysters.
They can come up here, yeah, hang out here. This is free for anybody to come up.
Oh, that's spectacular. Cool.
This is our wharf here. This is where we're going to bring in the mud skipper with all the water, and then we have a pump that'll suck the water up and bring it into this building here where our depuration plant is.
Okay.
We can also, we'd like to have a crane here to lift totes of oysters too, which we may have one day.
You're a long ways up off the water there.
Yeah, these are compressors for cooling, chilling the seawater in the filtration system.
You worried about having them out there and exposed like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they have to be outside where they can be cool, where they can vent off the heat. This is our little retail store.
Oh, wow.
And we have a little oyster bar here for shucking oysters. It's all permitted for food preparation, so we can shuck oysters and make sauces and all that kind of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. featuring some of my son's artwork. I have a son with special needs. He does wood burning.
Oh, no way.
His name's Luke.
Oh, wow. Is that anime? Is that what that is?
Yeah. He's into anime. He did that there too, and he did that guy with the blade.
Wow, he's good.
Blade of Myrtle. And so this passageway goes into our depuration facility and wet storage.
Wow.
And these, we have two systems here, A and B. Each one holds 96 trays of oysters, about 20,000 of the extra small oysters per system, something like that. And they're not being used at the moment, so they're empty right now. But you can see the different components. There's a seawater recirculation pump here. And down there is the titanium heat exchanger coil.
So when you bring water in from the bay, you'll dump it into here?
Yeah, so you fill up this sump with seawater from the bay. And then you turn on the pump and it goes through, the water goes through this ultraviolet sterilizer. And that's the idea of depuration, is that you put oysters in water that's very clean and pure, and they purge anything in their digestive system that that you don't want. And so it's more of a, it kind of guarantees the health department knows they've been through this process, so they know that they're clean, and allows us to sell oysters year round, even though they're usually fine anyway. They don't really need the process, but it gives sort of an added level of security or assurance, that sort of a final polishing of the oyster.
So you want to talk about that a little bit, George, about how you guys get shut down with rainfall and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so you saw out on the back bay, we're in that estuary, and there are a couple of big creeks that flow in there during rain events that you can get a pulse of dirty water, and that causes the bay to close down. So during periods where the water quality is not good enough, we can take oysters and run them through this system and verify and prove that they are top-notch and ready to eat.
So in a normal year, how long are you usually shut down for that water quality issue?
It's actually a set 3-month period.
Oh, it is?
November, December, January, plus any extra rainfall closures we might have, which might be another couple months.
Ouch.
Yeah.
So this is going to allow you to sell oysters throughout that time.
Yeah, and it's a very expensive process. Every single batch of oysters that we depurate has to be tested and proven that it's free of bacteria. And so that's expensive and time consuming. And so it's such a costly process. It would probably be about equal to just shutting down the oyster farm and going on vacation during that time. But the advantage of keeping the product going year round is that we keep our employees, we keep everybody employed. People that that have learned, they're experts in raising oysters and everything about them. We really want to be able to have a year-round business that we can keep paying people. And then our customers, having year-round reliably supplying our customers with oysters year-round is really good for them and for our relationship. So it helps the business to stay open year-round.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, so it starts here, and then it starts flowing through these trays.
Yeah, so the water comes up through the UV sterilizer, and then it goes through and it comes up these left-hand pipes, and these are flow meters that tell you how much water is going up. And this is called a stack system for depuration. It's kind of unique. I don't think there's anybody else in the country doing this yet. Our health department, the state health department, has never seen it before, and they don't understand it, and I'm having to tell them about it. But it's actually a proven system from the UK. It was developed in the UK, and it's been around since the 60s, and it works really well. And it has a few advantages over a typical tank system. One is the floor space. It saves floor space in that you got a lot of oysters in a small footprint. And the other is that you have the water flowing through a stack of trays of oysters. And
So is the upper tray flowing into the lower tray? And
the water goes up to the top and goes in the top tray, and it cascades from tray to tray. And all these trays will be full of water and oysters. And so every single tray gets the same flow rate of water. If you just have a large tank and you stick baskets of oysters all over the tank and have water flowing through it, you're bound to have dead corners where there's not much water flow or exchange. And with this system, you're guaranteed every oyster is getting a nice flow of water over it.
Nice. And so the outflow comes to this side.
And so this here is the drain system and it's only used if you want to drain the water out of a tray. So let's say we have these all full of water and oysters, water's cascading through. And by the way, the cascades are another advantage of this system. As the water goes from one bin to another, it cascades through the air, and turbulence and splashing causes it to be reoxygenated. So each tray gets nice oxygenated water from the cascades. And then let's say we want to harvest all these oysters and sell them. What you do is we would have all these little red valves closed when they're full of water, and these red valves are the drain valves. And so let's say we want to drain these, so we hook up these little pipes, these little hoses, open up the red valves, and the water just drains out of each tray and just goes down into the sump. So that's all this is for. It's just and now you've got a tray of oysters that's been drained of water, and you can pull it out and put it on the table and pack it up. Yeah.
Wow, very cool. And those trays look like they're actually made for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they have, they're specially adapted fish bins. They're just fish bins, but they've been specially adapted. They've got these baffles here, so water comes in here and it has to go through these little holes, so it kind of makes a laminar, nice, smooth, non-turbulent flow of water. Because the idea, you want the oysters to be processing the water, and you want their fecal matter to just fall out and stay at the bottom of this. You don't want to resuspend it and mix it all up and pulverize it and then feed it to the other oysters. Yeah.
And that's the whole idea with the grading at the bottom, is allow that fecal material to settle.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool, man. Impressive.
Cool. Yeah. This is a biofilter here with little bio beads. So if we keep the thing full for months, then you'll build up nitrifying bacteria on these like you have in an aquarium. You know? And that way we can reuse the same water. We don't have to go get new water every single time we do a batch of oysters. And this is a little protein skimmer here. It has an air stone. There's an air stone in the bottom, and it causes, with microfine bubbles, the bubbles capture protein and other organic matter and makes a foam. And the foam collects in here, and then you clean this out. And so that removes organic matter out of the water.
interesting. You know, I do a field trip with Questa class. We go out to the water treatment plant.
Oh, really?
And it's the same kind of thing out there. They have like a foam thing.
Scale.
Yeah.
Do they do foaming?
Yeah. Like when they get a lot of fat into the system, they have these bacteria that eat the fat, and they want to get rid of those bacteria because they're bad for the water treatment. And so they foam the water to collect that.
Oh,
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah, and this whole facility has a sloped concrete floor with a floor drain. This drain goes to the sewer. So it's so that we can, because we don't want the dirty water from the bottom of those oyster bins. That's supposed to go to the sewer. However, the bulk of seawater, when we discharge a lot of seawater out of the wastewater treatment plant doesn't want salt water, because they want to be able to reuse the water. They don't want salt. So that clean seawater is going to get pumped or gravity out through a hole in the floor back to the ocean.
And that just goes straight down to the bay.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. You got another one over there.
Yeah.
All right. Is that your?
So this place is cantilevered over the water here.
Right.
So.
Very cool, George. Thank you very much. I appreciate the tour. I've been looking forward to seeing this whole thing.
Have more students out here.
I know.
Maybe next time.
Next time, hopefully.